Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time, we're tackling a word you probably use all the time, granular.
Granular, huh?
Yeah, but we're going way beyond just, the everyday meaning.
Okay, yeah.
We're going to see how granular pops up in science, marketing, music, even medicine.
Wow, that's a pretty wide range.
It is, and to help us get there, we've got a really interesting mix of sources. We've got some dictionary definitions, a marketing blog post, a scientific Wikipedia entry,
Okay.
a vocabulary website, a YouTube video transcript. This one's about something called a granular synthesizer.
Interesting.
And we even found a medical website about wound care.
So we're really covering all the bases here, huh?
We are, so why don't we just jump right in? Let's start with the basics. The Cambridge Dictionary, they tell us granular means something is made of granules, which gives it, a grainy texture.
Okay, so like sand or sugar.
Exactly, yeah. Simple enough, right?
Right.
But then Merriam-Webster, they add another layer. They define granular as also meaning like finely detailed information, like an in-depth analysis or something.
So it's not just about physical texture, it's also about the level of detail.
Yeah, and vocabulary.com backs that up. They describe granularity as meaning both large particles and detailed information.
It's like the word has two different personalities.
Right, I know. It's kind of weird. Okay, so let's see how this plays out in like the real world. First up, science. Our Wikipedia source talks about granular materials.
Granular materials?
Yeah, like sand dunes or even asteroids in space.
Asteroids?
Yeah, they're considered granular material.
Huh, okay.
So the Wikipedia entry, it defines granular materials as being made up of macroscopic particles.
Macroscopic.
Yeah, meaning you can, see them with the naked eye.
Okay.
And these particles, they lose energy when they interact with each other, usually through friction.
So it's not just about them being small, it's about how they behave together.
And here's the really cool part. Depending on how much energy is involved, granular materials can act like a solid, a liquid, or even a gas.
Wait, really? They can switch between states like that?
It's wild, right? It's like they can't make up their minds.
That's fascinating.
Now, you know how when you shake a can of mixed nuts,
Uh-huh.
the Brazil nuts always end up on top?
Yeah.
Have you ever wondered why that happens?
Honestly, kinda.
That's called the Brazil nut effect. And it happens because as you shake the container, the smaller particles, they settle at the bottom, and this pushes the larger Brazil nuts up.
Huh. So it's not that the Brazil nuts are magically rising to the top. It's the smaller nuts pushing them up.
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
never thought of it that way.
It's counterintuitive, but it's a classic example of how granular materials behave in like weird ways. Okay, now let's switch gears to business.
Okay.
Our marketing blog post, it talks about granular marketing. And basically what that means is targeting very specific customer niches, like really specific.
Okay.
And you're using really detailed content to reach them.
So instead of just blasting out a general message to everyone, you're getting super specific about who you're talking to.
Exactly. Instead of like talking to all dog lovers, you might just target people who own, I don't know, golden retrievers, right?
Golden retriever owners, I like that, yeah.
And you would create content that speaks directly to them, to their very specific needs and interests.
I can see how that would be way more effective. You're not wasting your time with people who don't care.
Right. Plus, by getting so specific, you're basically establishing yourself as an expert on golden retriever needs, whatever those might be.
Yeah, you're building trust and credibility.
Exactly. Okay, now let's get a little more abstract. This YouTube transcript that we have, it explores granular synthesis in music.
Granular synthesis. That sounds kind of complicated.
I know, right? I'm kind of nervous to even try and explain this one, but basically, imagine you have a sound, like a melody or something, and you chop it up into these tiny little pieces, and they call them grains.
Okay, so we're getting granular with sound itself.
Right, and then, get this, they take these tiny grains and manipulate them. They can change their size, how close together they are, their position in the stereo field.
So you can really get in there and play with the individual elements of the sound.
They even adjust how the grains fade in and out, which is controlled by what they call an envelope.
An envelope?
It's basically a way to describe the shape of the sound wave over time, like how it changes in volume.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
So by messing around with all these parameters, you can create all sorts of crazy sounds.
Rhythmic pulses.
Yep.
Sweeping soundscapes.
Exactly.
It sounds like it would be a really creative tool for musicians.
Absolutely. Even a simple melody can be transformed into something totally new and unexpected. It's mind-blowing.
It is pretty wild. I'm starting to see how this granular thing is more than just a word. It's like a whole way of thinking about things.
It is, and we haven't even gotten to the medicine part yet. This one's pretty interesting.
Okay, hit me with it.
So our medical source talks about something called granulating wounds, which describes the way healing tissue looks. It's red and kind of bumpy, and you know why they call it granular.
Because it looks like it's made of tiny grains.
Exactly.
So even in medicine, we're talking about texture, about individual components making up a larger whole.
It really ties everything together, doesn't it? It's like this one word, granular, can connect sand dunes to marketing to sound waves to healing wounds.
I'm really curious to see where else this goes.
Me too. So I guess that's it for part one. We'll pick up the thread in part two, and hopefully by then we'll have a better idea of what it really means to think granularly.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive on granular. So in this part, let's try to connect the dots between, sand dunes and marketing strategies and even those healing wounds we talked about.
Okay, yeah, I'm ready to see the big picture here. It still feels kind of wild to me that one word can apply to so many different things. What is it, the common thread?
Well, the main takeaway, I think, is that granular always has to do with breaking something down into its smaller parts. It's about understanding the building blocks.
Okay, so like when scientists are looking at those granular materials, they're not just seeing a big pile of sand, they're analyzing the individual particles.
Exactly. And it's how those particles interact, how they behave together. That's what makes granular materials so interesting, right?
Right, and in business, like with granular marketing, you're dividing a market into these super specific segments.
Right. Instead of trying to reach everyone with a general message, you're focusing on a smaller group with a very targeted message.
It's like taking a giant puzzle and separating it into individual pieces so you can really focus on each one.
That's a great analogy.
And with the music thing, that granular synthesis, you're taking a sound and deconstructing it, right?
Yeah, chopping it up into those tiny grains. And then you can manipulate those individual pieces to create something completely new.
Okay, so we've got sand, marketing, music, and even in medicine, when they talk about a granulating wound, they're basically describing the texture of the healing tissue at a microscopic level.
It's seeing those tiny bumps, those individual components that are working together to heal the wound.
I see, I see. So granular is about more than just looking at the big picture. It's about zooming in and understanding the tiny details that make up that big picture.
Exactly. And it's not just about observation. It's about how understanding those details can actually change how we approach things.
Okay, so how does thinking granularly actually help us? Like in our daily lives, why should we care about this?
Well, it can make a huge difference in how we solve problems, how we learn, and even how we tap into our own creativity.
Okay, I like where this is going, but give me an example. How does understanding granular materials help someone who's not a scientist, in their everyday life?
Okay, sure. Imagine you're designing something, anything really. Let's say it's a container for storing food.
Okay, a food container.
Right. If you understand how those granular materials behave, how they flow, how they pack together, you can design a better container.
You mean a container that's more efficient, right? Like it doesn't waste space.
Yeah, exactly. Or a container that's more durable so it doesn't break easily when it's full of, rice or something.
Right, right. Okay, that makes sense. You're applying these scientific principles to a real-world problem. But what about learning? Like, how does this granular approach help us learn better?
Well, instead of trying to learn everything at once, you break it down into smaller, more manageable chunks.
So it's less overwhelming, right? Especially with a really complex subject.
Right. Like imagine learning a new language. You don't start by trying to have a full conversation. You start with the alphabet, then basic words and phrases. You build up gradually.
You're mastering the fundamental elements first. It's like building a house, brick by brick.
Exactly. And it applies to any skill or hobby. If you're learning to play the guitar, you start with basic chords and scales.
Okay, I'm getting it. So you're saying break things down into smaller pieces and master those first. Got it.
Now let's talk about creativity.
Oh yeah, the creativity part, I'm really curious about this, especially with that whole music thing, the granular synthesis. It seems so out there. How does a granular approach help with creativity?
Well, remember how those composers use granular synthesis. They're manipulating tiny fragments of sound. And this lets them experiment with sound in a whole new way, like taking familiar melodies and reimagining them completely.
So by understanding the basic elements, you can actually be more creative.
Exactly. It's about seeing the potential in the small details. You take things apart, then you recombine them in new and unexpected ways.
So granular isn't just about analysis. It's about using that analysis to build something new and innovative. Wow.
It really is a powerful way of thinking. The more we think granularly, the better we are at solving problems and discovering new possibilities.
This is really eye-opening. I never realized how important this idea could be. It's like we've unlocked some secret code to understanding the world.
I know, it's pretty cool, right? So we've talked about problem solving, learning, creativity. What else does granular have in store for us? I guess we'll find out in the final part of our deep dive.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final part of our granular deep dive. I'm excited to see where else this takes us. We've already learned so much. It's like granular is everywhere now.
It really is. It's kind of mind-blowing. And we've only just scratched the surface. There's still so much more to explore. Like how granular is changing the way we deal with data and even how we think about education.
Data and education. Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's start with the data part. We live in this world that's just overflowing with information, right? So how does thinking granularly help us make sense of it all?
Well, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with these massive data sets, like customer information or social media trends. It's just overwhelming,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And that's where the granular approach comes in. It helps us break down all that data into smaller, more manageable pieces.
Okay, so instead of like drowning in a sea of numbers, we can zoom in on the specific details that are actually relevant to us.
Exactly. Imagine a company that has millions of customer records. A granular approach allows them to filter and sort that data based on very specific criteria.
Like age or location or what they've bought before.
Yeah, things like that, or any other attribute that's important to them.
And then they can use that information to create like targeted marketing campaigns, right?
Right. Instead of sending a generic email to everyone, they can tailor their messages to very specific customer segments.
So basically, granular data analysis helps companies understand their customers better.
Exactly. It's about turning information into insight and then using that insight to make better decisions.
Wow. Okay, so granular is like a secret weapon for businesses in the age of big data. That's fascinating.
It really is. Now let's shift gears to education. How do you think this granular approach can improve the way we learn?
Well, we kind of touched on this earlier with learning a musical instrument or a new language. It's about breaking down a complex subject into smaller, more digestible units, right?
Exactly. And this applies to any field of study, whether it's history or math or science, anything. Instead of trying to absorb a whole textbook at once, you focus on mastering one concept at a time.
You're building a strong foundation.
Right. You start with the basics and gradually build up to more complex ideas.
It reminds me of how online courses are structured these days, with short videos and quizzes and interactive exercises, all designed to help you learn step by step.
That's a perfect example. A granular approach lets educators tailor their teaching methods to different learning styles and paces.
So whether you're a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner, there's a granular approach that can help you learn more effectively.
It's all about understanding those individual components of learning and using that knowledge to create a more effective and engaging experience for each student.
This has been amazing. We've gone from sand dunes to marketing strategies to sound waves to healing wounds to data analysis to education, all thanks to Granular.
It's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Granular really is more than just a word. It's like a whole new way of thinking about the world.
So what's the main takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
Embrace the power of granular thinking. Whether you're trying to solve a complex problem, learn a new skill, or just understand the world a little bit better, remember to break things down, look at those individual components.
And use that understanding to create something new, something innovative.
Exactly.
So to all our listeners out there, I challenge you to start seeing the world through this granular lens. Look for those individual components that make up the bigger picture, break down those complex ideas, and don't be afraid to get granular.
You might be surprised at what you discover. Often, those really important truths, they're hidden in the smallest details.
That's a great point. So on that note, we'll leave you to explore the granular nature of your own world. Until next time, happy exploring.